Is 5:30, so I'm going to go ahead and start recording and welcome you all to our second Zoom session. I'm excited to get into a bit more discussion with you all than we had last week, which was all about assignments and, increasing your stress levels and all that good stuff. So I'm hoping that tonight we can just focus on diving into the course content a little bit, and then just simply making sure that you all don't have any, or to see what questions you all have about trying to understand the results of your strengths finder results. So was happy to see all of those, and hope that you all had a chance to go ahead and connect with your group members and all that good stuff. So before I jump in, I don't think I have any announcements except for the quizzes are forthcoming. You will see a separate quizzes tab, just like you do for the announcements and modules. So when I post those, I will post an announcement and tell you that they are up, and then you'll just always be able to find them. And then they'll be posted on an ongoing basis. So any other just kind of general questions from last week, now that you've had a few days to digest everything? Okay. Well, we will go ahead and get started. I'm going to jump right into the PowerPoint. So let me go ahead and do a screen share. Okay. Okay. So this is available for you all to follow along. It is posted up on Canvas. And I think I mentioned last week that the lectures would be posted, pretty close to this, Monday that we're having in class. Sometimes they'll be posted earlier. So we're going to jump into this. And I wanted to start with talking about the art and science of leadership with your reactions from the blog. I know some of you may have not read the blog that was posted for this week. But I would love to get some of your reactions to that. Again, the reflection questions are really just for your own edification, and are really there for just another layer of opportunity for you to self-reflect and just think about topics, the leadership and management topics we will be covering over the semester. So each week, maybe not every single week, but each week we will have a blog that's posted. So this week's blog talked about how your emotions show up when you are in the workplace. And I'm curious if anybody would like to share. And if you aren't sharing and you don't have your phone on mute, please go ahead and mute your line so we can cut out the background noise. So what would you say, does anybody feel comfortable sharing any examples where you for a fact that your emotions came up in a professional situation, and just you want to share how it worked really well or how it maybe didn't go so well and what you learned from it? So this is a really broad question. I'd love to hear from you all.
So I have something.
Great.
So I had a supervision meeting with my employer, and in that supervision meeting, she brought up things that were told to her in confidence, as supervision type things. And so what she did was she put it into my review, things that I told her in confidence. Regarding like personal biases and things like that, just things that we were discussing. And so she actually put that in my review. And I was really upset about that because I felt like if I hadn't have told her that, she wouldn't have known about it. And so I was being very open and transparent, and so my emotions really got the best of me with that one, but I didn't act on them, and it was difficult not to act on them. My intuition was, that's an injustice, this is wrong, and you shouldn't do something like that. So but I did stuff it down, and I didn't let it get the best of me. But they are there. And so, but it was a really good lesson though, because I think as time went on, different things would come up, and different injustices. That seems to be the one that gets me, especially when it's, with other people. When I see them not being treated fairly. So I kind of, I'm better at, because I've been exposed to it over and over again. So now I'm better at keeping those emotions down. That's all I have.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I think that's a really great example of how sometimes you are not expecting something, and you get just kind of, lands right in your lap, and you just kind of have this immediate reaction that can be, pretty intense pretty quickly. So it sounds like that's a good example to think about, how emotions can show up, why they can show up, and it also does remind me, Dolores, that it's, bias. And again, I don't know if that was a social work setting or what setting it was, but it's, bias is one of those things that it's, it's tricky because can you please mute your line, whoever's typing things? Because it's really something that needs to be talked about. We need a safe place as social workers to be able to wrestle with whatever our personal or professional biases are. It's part of our responsibility under the Code of Ethics. And that's a really, really big deal. Unfortunately, a lot of times, supervisors in the field, they may not be social workers or supervisors, or even if they are, they may not feel comfortable having those much needed discussions, and they may be more focused on the work that needs to be done as opposed to helping you to process and learn, which is, what we want to focus on in the academic setting. You don't always get all of that support in the professional setting. So it really is a fine line, and it's important to understand, when is it okay to talk about those things so that they don't necessarily, wind up on your review or something like that you talked about. That sounds really, really, really challenging. So, but at the same time, it's like, it's good that you were bringing that up to be able to talk about it. So, but you're not the first person to tell me that those conversations have gone sideways. So, clearly we have some professional development to do with our supervisors out in the field. So thank you for sharing that. Are there any other examples that you all would like to share? I think it's really helpful to humanize this a lot.
I was working a few years back as a nursing assistant in a very large nursing home in Knoxville. And at the time, I was engaged, and me and my fiance lived together. Well, we had a very bad breakup. And in confidence, I went to my supervisor, who was a nurse practitioner. I told her everything that was going on, and I told her I needed a few days off because I was having to move and everything, and she said that was fine. She gave me a week off. Everything was great. But when I came back the following week, I had to come back on a different shift. They gave my spot away on the shift I was on. As soon as I clocked into work, people I didn't even know were walking up to me. How is everything? I heard about your relationship. Are you okay? They said you were suicidal, which wasn't even true at the time. But the fact that the confidence that I trusted her with, all my personal information that she took it upon herself to share with the entire facility, my response to that was to clock right back out and walk out of the building and never come back. I know my emotions got the best of me. I quit my job. But honestly, I don't know what I would have done different other than report her to administration because she broke that confidence. But I really didn't want to work there with so many rumors having a week to build about why I hadn't been there in a week.
I know, people thinking you were in the hospital or something like,
Yeah.
Gracious. Wow. Wow, that sounds really intense. Thank you for sharing that. That's, we've been there. I've walked out of, to be honest, I walked out of a job one time, only one time. It was not a really important job, but it was still a really, really big deal for me to do that, because that was not my style. But man, did my emotions get the better of me. And it happens. And, it's just another reminder. And I bring this question up, regardless of whether or not you chose to, read the blog, to just really put it out there that I really want to challenge you all, especially if this is really ingrained in you, to think about this idea that we have this professional persona. Who are we when we show up to work? Who are we when we clock in? Who are we when we meet with our clients? And our personal persona, which is who we are when we're outside of the office, and who we are when we're with our family and our friends and our loved ones and all that good stuff. And so many of us are taught, just culturally and just from a society standpoint, that those are essentially two different people, or they're, at the very least, you have your professional self and you have your personal self. And there's a really fine line in between those, and you're really not supposed to mix those. So there's a lot of expectations around not sharing personally, what's going on in a profession. Like, when you're at work, you keep your personal self outside of work and you just talk about your professional self. And there's a lot of, it's in our particular field, with having to be in pretty persistently stressful situations, where compassion and empathy are, cornerstones of our effective and competent practice. We have to be able to relate to others. And one of the ways that we do that is through bringing our whole selves to the job. Many of you all have chosen this profession because of your personal experiences, not necessarily because you read about social work in a book somewhere and thought it would be a good idea. Are you for some reason you feel driven to help others. And so we are in a unique position of being a very kind of personal profession and a very relational profession, while at the same time we need to maintain professional standards. So the more that when you are in the workplace, you can understand and identify and make decisions from a place of self-awareness and self-management, you will be a better social worker. And so I wanted to put this in front of you to think about, like, we all have emotions. We are all human beings. We all bring our whole selves to the job, whether or not you call it your professional self or your personal self. You're one person. You are not a dichotomous being. You are one person. And so if you had a bad day, if you went through a rough breakup, if you were struggling with to process something that you encountered at the office and it's impacting you on a personal level, you don't just switch gears. You're your whole self. And so how can you figure out how to manage and understand your whole self in the workplace so that you can be the best possible social worker you can be? And so I want you to think about it, and I challenge you all to think about this as you go. Just kind of we're in this course this semester, we're together for several weeks. Try to take stock of some examples in your internships or your jobs, or even with your family, where you see your emotions kind of coming into the situation. And especially, obviously that happens with family, but especially kind of focusing on your professional settings, where, what is triggering that? And how do your emotions serve you? Because they always serve you in some way. So how are they serving you? Are they helping you handle the situation in a really professional manner? Are you able to be empathetic? Are you able to be compassionate? Or are they kind of throwing up roadblocks for you? Are you realizing that you have a bit of a temper, or that you are really quick to judge? rather than kind of taking a deep breath and stepping back and evaluating the situation. So I'm really curious for you all to take some time and be intentional about just noticing. Don't judge, don't immediately try to change. Just notice, just kind of be mindful, be aware of what happens, especially when we get into, in a few minutes, we're going to talk more about leadership styles and, bosses and management and things like that. We're all in that in some way. We all have a supervisor in some way, shape, or form. And, emotions are important, but sometimes we don't necessarily know what's happening. We might not get clued into that we're having an emotional response, but chances are your body is responding in a certain way. If someone gives you a look at the office, or if you run into somebody that you have some bad blood with, or you kind of have this sort of interpersonal conflict, or you just simply don't like them for some reason, how is your body responding? Are you does your heart start to beat fast? Does your do you notice yourself kind of sort of holding your breath, or does somebody, does your supervisor walk in the room and you just immediately relax? You just immediately exhale and are like, thank goodness, so-and-so is here. I am so happy to see them. They always make these meetings go smoothly. I always feel so comfortable around this person. I'm so glad I get to work with them. And you realize that your shoulder, all of a sudden, just even saying it, then you just all of a sudden relax. Your shoulders kind of, they release their tension, all of those things. And I know it sounds like really basic, but oftentimes we just don't take the time to reflect on that and to realize that understanding our reactions and understanding, basically just practicing self-awareness, practicing, being mindful and observing how we're reacting to others can actually make us a better social worker. So that's really my whole kind of point with that. And even though the blogs none of them are really written by social workers, they're all from the business community, they really bring up some important topics for us to think about and apply to social work settings. So jumping into the next question about intuition, I'm curious around kind of to what degree do you pay attention or value your intuition or kind of quote unquote gut feeling in making decisions? This is a very personal thing. We all kind of have a different relationship with our intuition. So I'm curious how the blog talked about that. And I'm curious what your response is.
I trust my intuition and my gut most of the time. I use logical reasoning as well, but I mostly trust it. I had a client last week in my internship who's had some pretty serious suicide attempts, but they lacked the plan and the means, and they denied any current thoughts. So taking him to the hospital was not the option, but I had make them make a mental health appointment for a follow-up because all we were doing was an assessment for a different reason. And my supervisor believed that they needed to be seen by a psychiatrist. And I did not feel comfortable in letting this person just walk out. So we set up, weekly mental health checks until appointments were given and medication was regulated and stuff like that.
So you're saying you sort of disagreed with your supervisor, and is that what you're saying?
No. I agreed with her. I just didn't, because it was going to be a little while until she got an appointment.
Okay.
So it wasn't comforting to let that client walk out without something in place until that appointment came, because God forbid that client go and commit suicide, right after you just learned all this about them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it sounds like you're saying that you listened to your intuition to just say, this just really doesn't feel right. I really feel like this client needs some more support.
Mm-hmm.
So did it work out?
Well, they're supposed to have an appointment today. I've been trying to reach this person today they're supposed to have a check with me tomorrow. I haven't heard from them. So I contacted my boss and to see what we're going to do if I don't hear from her by tomorrow. Mm-hmm. So I hope it works.
Fingers crossed. Well, at the
Yes.
very least, it's like it's helping you stay in communication with them and potentially keep track and or intervene earlier than you would be able to. Yeah,
Yes.
that's a great example. That's a great. Anybody have any kind of different experiences? Maybe they struggle with trusting their intuition, or they're not sure if that's appropriate to do in the workplace.
I feel like in my field work, I am struggling a little bit, but I sort of have a situation that now goes back to what we were discussing earlier. So when I came back from the break, I found out that my supervisor was fired.
Ooh.
And she was the only MSW in my agency.
Oh.
So now that if, when we were talking about emotions, when I found out that she was fired, it was definitely, my morale just plummeted.
Yes.
And it's sort of strange because I work at a homeless agency. So to have somebody out of a job is a little bit of it feels a little bit like a violation of the code of ethics for me. It's like, it's people's well-being here. So I had a really good relationship with her, but now I felt like when I left, my confidence was good, but now I just feel like I'm back to square one. And I don't have the support of an MSW now. There's other people that are at the agency that are, obviously are working there, but not somebody with that perspective.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel just now that I'm sort of like trying to figure things out, and I have like a situation set up with the university now, but it's just not ideal in my mind. So I think I just don't feel like I trust my intuition as maybe I would have if she was still there.
That's interesting that you're equating your kind of trusting your intuition like with the presence of another person, especially given that intuition is such a internal guide. So that's interesting to me that you've made that like connection in relationship to somebody else, which sounds like it's more about confidence.
Yeah, I think it is, but I feel like that's part of intuition is just being confident enough to trust it. You know what I mean? And this is such a new field for me.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I just need to get my brain back, and say, okay, I just have to go and just take what I've learned from last semester and just go with it.
And so we're so often in that space. I mean, especially, it's kind of unrelated, but it reminds me of a time. Thank you for sharing that, Christine. It's really, it reminds us like we're all in different places. Everyone in this program is learning from a different space. Some of y'all are way more experienced than others. Some have other experience in other areas. And so we all kind of come to this space in a different, from different backgrounds. And it just reminds me that, there are times where I was in a job and I like literally had no idea what I was doing, and had very, very little supervision or support, kind of like what you're saying right now, like change in leadership. I remember one time I had 4 different supervisors in a year and a half, and I thought I was going to crawl out of my skin. We all have these, I've had jobs where I didn't have, I didn't have a job description. So the name is like, I think my supervisor said, we know we needed you, but we knew we needed somebody, but we just didn't know what we needed you to do. And so I was like, okay, I'll just run with it. We'll figure it out. There's so many different, situations that we might find ourselves in a social work setting that it's like, again, kind of understanding like, how do our emotions serve us? How do how connected are we with our intuition, and how do we use that as a tool to help us, really guide and make decisions? How confident are we? What do we need? What type of working environments and type of supervisors, like what kind of behavior do we need from our supervisors to feel confident and competent in our jobs? So a lot of those are internal to us and we have control over. And then there's a lot that we don't have control over, external to us. So how do we function in relationship to that we don't have control over? Like a boss getting fired is a perfect example. I've been in similar situations myself, and it's really, really stressful. Pushes all kinds of buttons. I had a supervisor one time that I used to say she pushed every single button that I knew that I had, and everyone that I didn't know that I had. And so it was a huge learning opportunity for me to just be kind of constantly triggered and trying to figure out like how do you deal with that? Because so much of it is, again, kind of having your personal self and your personal issues show up in a professional setting where you really need to maintain these professional standards. So these are just like little nuggets, little tidbits that we're going to kind of cover as we move through the material, just to challenge you, just to put it out there to get you all thinking about really what makes you tick. I mentioned last week that a huge component of this course was focused on self-awareness and self-evaluation and self-reflection. And so these are just little prompts to get you started. So we're going to jump a little bit. Thank you for those who shared. More time to share moving on. So we're going to jump into an intro of organizational management and leadership skills. And this is pretty much covered in your Brody text. I'm not going to go over all of this, but everything's here in this PowerPoint for you to review and reflect on at your convenience. So what are some of the differences that you all kind of thought about prior to reading this chapter and prior to coming to this course? What are some of the ways that you thought, kind of what did you think a leader was versus a manager? Or kind of what did you think leadership was versus what you thought management was? Anybody want to share?
Yeah, maybe leader, more strategy, management, more tactics.
Yeah. Okay. Yep. That's one way. Yeah. What else?
I just thought leadership would be more hands-on and management would be more delegating,
Okay. Good. What else?
I'd have to say the same thing that she just said. I always think of like the manager as someone who kind of sits back and tells people what to do, where a leader is willing to get out and show them, say, this is what needs done, this is how we do it. And it's more hands-on rather than just sitting back and saying, do this, and then watching people do it.
Yeah. So there's kind of this connotation that it's almost positional, like even physical, like the leader is sort of, with us, they're like rolling up the sleeves, like in the trenches, helping us generate a vision, and a manager is kind of sitting back, sort of, telling us what to do, and has their sleeves like, buttoned up, and is busy, talking, not necessarily doing.
If you ever worked in a factory setting, there's usually a supervisor or manager, and there's a shift leader who's actually an employee on the floor actually working, but he's the leader of that shift.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's where I got my description from.
Well, and it's not uncommon. And I think some of this is there's some differences and nuance differences in, and simply just the setting, just like you're saying, like some things are extremely hierarchical. You've got your CEO or your executive director, and then you've got your kind of vice presidents or, kind of second tier leadership. And then you've got your managers and kind of middle managers, and then your supervisors and your front line. It's just sort of this kind of pyramid. There's a lot more people at the bottom of the pyramid than there is at the top. And then, the higher up you go, the more responsibility you have, and typically the more money. That's sort of the typical kind of structure that we think about. And oftentimes that's very true. That's just our that's just reality. That's just what happens. So, I am curious, like, what do you think is, do you think that you can do you have to be a leader to be a manager? Like, do you, like, are they mutually exclusive?
No. But I came out of a very hierarchical organization, several of them actually, that they perceive them as separate, but they perceive them as separate more because of status than because of the actual roles. So it was sort of perceived that if you were, we'll just say, a director or above, and these are business roles, so it was a director or above, you were considered a quote unquote leader because you were you were a big thinker. You thought about big things and broad things, and you didn't have time for the details. But if you were a manager or below, you were a lower level person who did task-oriented items, and it was defined, not that that's not the truth, but that was sort of what was laid over, but it was more driven by status within the organization. So there was a lot of pressure to push yourself up to that director level so you could be considered part of the leadership team and not part of the tactical team.
Mm-hmm. And I would say that is not uncommon across even, nonprofits and certainly state government. So would you say that you have to be a manager in order to be a leader? Like, would you have to be at that management level?
I've had several managers who couldn't lead a thing, a lot of them have gotten fired. And I've had several managers who depended on their employees to lead the charge, and they just kind of sat back and complained when something went wrong.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think they're mutually exclusive at all.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you really, as social workers, you can be a leader, and there is opportunity for you to, embrace and employ, leadership behavior, leadership characteristics, regardless of where you sit within the organization. So they are most definitely not mutually exclusive. And sometimes you can be both at the same time. Some managers that are true managers and kind of like we're saying, focus on the kind of day-to-day and tactical issues and details. Some of them are fantastic leaders. And like you said, sometimes you can be in management and not be a good leader. So there's lots of different combinations that you can see. And again, this is the part of the course where we're really, we're identifying just sort of, really basic information about leadership and management, but think about it, try to process all this information in relation to who you are in these different scenarios. So how are you being a leader? Are you currently in a management role? How are you interacting with your current manager? Things like that. So a little bit of a quote here from Teddy Roosevelt. So he said, people ask the difference between a leader and a boss. The leader works in the open and the boss in covert. The leader leads and the boss drives. So how does this quote resonate with you? It sounds like it's a little bit similar to what we've been talking about. How's this land for you all? Do you agree, disagree?
Not real sure about the boss being covert. I've known more, I don't know, what was the word? Narcissistic bosses that want all your ideas to seem like their own, but I'm not sure. I've never had one closed up in an office that you never could talk to or see, or.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not real sure if I agree with that.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, it really depends. And sometimes the boss is kind of behind the scenes, and is kind of has the whip hand, so to speak, and is sort of driving the process and things like that. And the leader is sort of out there, the face, the front, kind of leading the charge, so to speak. So, I love this meme. I'm a big fan of memes. And I think that this pretty much encapsulates everything that we've been talking about. A lot of you, one of the first thing you said is that leaders they're in the trenches, they're helping you to understand, what the vision is, and they're helping you to get there. So they're out there, like I said, rolling up the sleeves, helping you find that direction, chart that path. And the boss is up here kind of saying, here's what I think you should do, or here's what to do, being more directive and expecting you to kind of go and do it. So it is, I think it is interesting. It kind of, I think you all really covered this a lot. So again, just kind of covering a little bit of getting into more detail about the text and how they articulated the differences between a leader and a manager. And I want to also keep in mind that oftentimes, like especially when we look at things like this, we might equate a boss with a manager or someone in management. And oftentimes, this really is what it looks like. Sometimes it's kind of a combination of this. So really, we could see a lot of different things. Sometimes this person right here is the manager. So it really can look a lot of different ways. And I want to make sure that, we don't demonize management. Without management, you all wouldn't get paid. Your courses wouldn't get registered for, you wouldn't, there's just really big, your mail wouldn't wind up in your mailbox. There's just, the management makes the world go round because it is focused on getting things done. But there is this other opportunity to, focus on leadership. And the text talks about the differences between a leader and a manager, really thinking about the leader kind of being an innovator, thinking about long range perspectives, challenging the status quo, shaking things up, thinking, just because we've done things for the last 5 years this way doesn't mean that this is the best way. Let's really think about how we're doing this. And it's focused on doing the right thing. A manager, according to the text, focuses on maintaining the status quo, has a more short-range perspective, and focuses on structures and systems. Again, that's a lot of the kind of day-to-day results, day-to-day tasks. Like I think, Donna said, like more tactical issues, and is focused on doing things right. And right according to whatever that current status quo is. So we'll just kind of jump through a couple of these things. So before we jump to leadership styles, are there any more thoughts about just the differences between leadership and management? Does anybody not agree with this or have any more questions or comments about it?
I would just say one more thing, not to disagree with anything that's been said, but I would just say also that especially with leaders, you can have a leader who's not always down in the trenches as much as we tend to think, but I think to be a good leader, you have to really understand the assignment, the task, and if not having that actual experience, really understand what the workers who are doing are actually going through. Because if you're trying to envision anything overall for the agency, you need to know what it actually takes to get things done.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, I like this graphic too. I agree with you. And I like this graphic too, because it implies a striving for, there's something that I think inherently we think about leadership, that we're changing something, or we're heading in a direction. It's very directional. And I think it also implies, when you think about it, that this person here is doing something to influence these people to follow them. So there's this whole other piece of so whether they're in the trenches or not, they are eliciting they're eliciting motivation from other people, because, this person is motivating because things are still moving, but this person's motivating in a very different way. They're motivating through pushing, as opposed to maybe pulling. So there's these kind of subtle differences that we can think about it that way. So again, this is think about, if you are one of these people, how are you working? How do you feel? How are your emotions showing up? What is your intuition telling you about, being this person versus being this person, and having someone driving rather than pulling or influencing you to follow them through things like inspiration rather than consequence, perhaps. Thank you, Charity, for that. So leading the organization. So your leadership self-assessment asks you to specifically think about some of these leadership styles. And this list is perhaps not exhaustive, but it's what's covered in the text. And yes, absolutely. So we're gonna go over a couple of these just to make sure that we are on the same page, and also just to be thinking about some examples. I pretty much feel like if you've been in any kind of a job, even like restaurant jobs and things like that, you've probably seen a pretty wide variety of leadership. So, and sometimes, especially with some of these styles, we may think about these, okay, well, my manager, because again, this is sort of shifting a little bit. So I am a manager, I'm a supervisor, but I'm employing a leadership style in order to get my work done, whatever that is. So chances are you've seen this in different situations. So I'm curious if you have some examples to share. So directive leadership, these leaders feel that they must assume personal responsibility for making major decisions. There's that word again, feel. They may not necessarily think that they must assume personal, or they might, or it's probably both, or maybe they're told, so it's a fact that they have to assume personal responsibility. But this is basically a common characteristic of people who take on a more directive leadership style. So I really want to point this out, because when you think about how you are in relation to someone who may be using a more directive leadership approach, this may not be the most obvious part. You may just hear the taskmaster part. You may feel like this person really likes to take charge or be in control or even micromanage. But this whole personal responsibility thing is really key, because this is probably what is motivating their behavior. So if you feel you are under a more directive leadership style and it's starting to chafe or it really rubs you the wrong way, or you don't feel like you're getting a lot of, it's just not a good fit for you, but there's nothing you can really do about it, maybe try to focus on what is really making that person tick, and understand that this is a huge weight. It is a very huge weight to assume personal responsibility for the work of other people. That's a hard, that's a heavy weight, and it can cause people to behave in ways that they might not in another scenario where they don't feel like they're personally responsible for something. So that may be a good place to make some progress, to kind of focus on this and ask questions about that. So this style is especially important in crisis situations requiring time-sensitive action. And thinking about each of these styles, we do want to think about them in, is the style, matching the work that needs to be done. Sometimes the leadership style and the work or the employee, it's a good fit. And sometimes it's not. So this is another avenue, another layer for you all to be reflecting on in your current situations. So if you're in ER and you have, let's say, a gunshot wound come in, and you are the, attending physician in the ER, is that time a good time to sit back and try to get input from other people about what they think? Or is that more of a time for, to make really quick and fast decisions because someone's life is in your hands? So you're just going to you're going to download the information that you have, and you're going to make really rapid fire decisions.
Rapid decision.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of social work looks like that. It may not be the ER specific. Sometimes it is the ER. There's definitely social workers in the ER. So it's, you've got these certain situations where you want somebody to be directive. I think about things like in Nashville in 2010, we had a really, really, really bad flood. And as a city, it was very, very scary. And I remember being very grateful for all of the people out there that were just, making these rapid fire decisions. People were losing their homes, they were losing their cars, they were losing their lives. It was their school, it was really rough. And if you were here, you know that, and you remember that. But it's, we had to make some really quick decisions. And in those kind of crisis situations, being on the receiving end of very directive leadership is often comforting. It's often exactly what you need. You just want to help, and you just want somebody to tell you what to do, because you're not at that place where you can figure out what to do, but you're willing to help. So oftentimes this is crucial. This is really important and really appropriate, especially when, like I said, it's the right time. It's the right, like you can have this leadership. It's not, a lot of times we think of it as like authoritarian, parenting or something like we think this might be like the bad leadership style, but really it's about what is the good leadership style is the one that's the right fit for the right situation. So we can't kind of say that one is really better than the other. So participative leadership, this is these leaders that present ideas and invite feedback. They want to retain final decision-making authority, but want others to suggest alternative solutions and really kind of participate in that decision-making process. But they know that ultimately they're making that final decision. These leaders that use this style often are able to foster loyalty with their employees. They're able to build morale and potentially, harmony, because they're just kind of constantly asking for feedback, and it seems more open, and just more of this kind of whole process, like everybody's voice gets to be heard. This style emphasizes relationships and creates a sense of belonging among others, and this style is particularly important when working with other professionals who tend to want to be consulted and want to exert influence. Does anybody feel that way? Does anybody just get really grumpy if people don't ask their opinion, or you just know that you work best when you're able to kind of share your ideas?
I feel that way sometimes, and I know for my job, sometimes we aren't all physically in a location, so we use Zoom a lot for meetings, and within my department, we're all really good at making sure everyone is included in conversations, but when it gets outside of our department, not everyone is used to using Zoom, and so I struggle to allow my opinions to be heard because it's such a hassle to allow there to be space to talk if I'm not physically in that space, and then I find myself a little bit frustrated.
Yes. That does sound really challenging. Christine, that brings like a whole other layer into like just thinking about leadership and management across settings, where you're like in one place and you're having to work with people in another place. So you can't always sit down, we rely a lot on like physical, body language and things like that. But if you're having to do everything electronically, sort of like we are, we're in the, we're not in the classroom, we're in the virtual classroom. So, it does require that we, work together and relate together in a different way. So thank you for that. I agree. I'm definitely one of these people that I really prefer being consulted, and I definitely prefer consulting others. So it's really it's a bi-directional thing for me. Absolutely. And I definitely, it goes to kind of this feeling valued. We all have, it's really important to understand what makes your employees feel valued. So if you're in a supervisory role, that's a great place to start. What do you like? And it's a great place for you to start with yourself so that you can learn how to manage up better, so that you can let your supervisor know what works for you. Some people it's pay, other people it's a parking spot or some kind of public recognition at the staff meeting, or getting to go home a little early on Fridays or something that we all feel valued in a different way. And consultation is a way that I personally feel valued. And it actually is directly related to my strengths from my StrengthsFinder results. So, some of there's some, if you're wondering, you may not know exactly where you fit along this continuum, like what you, how you can feel valued at work. There may be some ideas there in your assessment results. So lastly, we're going to talk about delegative leadership. This kind of is exactly what it says. This is a very, very different kind of leadership, and is perhaps not, sometimes I think we've heard some examples of just they want employees to run the show. But this is really a big difference from these other leadership styles, where the leader themselves are actually giving decision-making responsibilities to others. That's a very different place than asking for people's input, but maintaining that or retaining that decision-making responsibility. It's a big deal to just wholesale delegate that responsibility to somebody else. It means that it means your whole dynamic in your office or in that team, that work team, is going to look very different. If they participate in the decision-making process, they assume no more authority than anyone else. It's a little bit of a trend. I don't know how much so in nonprofit organizations, but I have seen it in some places where there's, we've been talking about this hierarchical structure. There is such a thing actually as like a flat organizational structure where you might have kind of, one president or one director, but then everybody else is on the same, the same plane, or even the director themselves is on the same plane. And so it really is more, it's kind of more circular than it is sort of, in a pyramid, or more flat than it is in a pyramid. And so that may be an environment where you might find more delegative leadership. So this style works best with others who are highly motivated and need little direction. Does anybody feel, I'm sure many of you all feel highly motivated, but do any of you all feel like, would you put yourself in this category that you just really don't need a lot of direction? You really just kind of like to figure things out on your own. And if you have a supervisor who's really like kind of micromanaging, that's going to be the worst possible combination for you. You really don't like to be told what to do.
I don't like to be told what to do. Like, I've been managed by someone, and I don't have a problem being managed by someone that doesn't have experience in what I do. Mm-hmm. But I have a problem with being managed by someone who has no experience in what I do, but then starts wanting to tell me how to do it. That drives me bananas. And I would define myself as this: leave me alone. I'm the expert in dealing with partners. Let me deal with partners and tell you what I'm doing. Don't try to tell me what to do when you don't know even how to do it.
Right. Absolutely. So this is, this again goes back to this goodness of fit. I've worked with and know several people who fall into this category. I'm not quite, I definitely, can work with little direction, and I am pretty highly motivated, but I like feedback. Some people don't even want that. I might go and work independently, but I'm always going to circle back around and make sure that I'm not, getting too far off track. Because that's a personal value of mine. I like to know that I'm kind of quote unquote doing the right thing. So it's, you may be some sort of kind of combination of this, but it's important, again, just to reinforce that understanding where you are in relation to those that you're working with is just as important as understanding what type of style the other, your particular boss or supervisor is using. Some others working with this type of leader are free to innovate, experiment, and take calculated risk. A lot of people love, like I would put myself in this category. I really like to innovate. I really like to experiment and take calculated risk. And when you have someone who's able to, delegate that authority to you, or at least tell you that, like, yes, go forth and prosper on this project and check in with me, and I'm here to support you however you need it. That's a very different place than working with someone who is much more focused on, telling you what to do, or maybe just asking for input, but they're ultimately making the decision. So you kind of, you have to just deal with whatever their decision is. In this environment, it's more like you can make the decision, and, the boss is going to support you as opposed to the other way around. So, and so sometimes this is really a great place to be, especially if you are trying to really develop the capacity of your team or your employees. Like, sometimes you just need to take the calculated risk of kind of seeing what they're made of, seeing what they're capable of. And you can't really figure that out if you're constantly in there with them and making those decisions. So really, ultimately the message here is that no style is better than the others. Effective leaders are able to assess situations and then be able to pick and choose from characteristics of each one of these leadership styles. So it needs to vary based on intelligence, education, and experience of others. And sometimes you may need to employ all three with the same employee, just at different times. Like, especially when you're onboarding somebody, when someone's first coming into a job, you need to be more directive because they truly don't know what to do. So, you may have to start that way, but, then kind of ease out and, and kind of then ease into more participative or even more delegated things kind of down the line. So sometimes it's a function of, level of time in the job or level of experience coming in. But this assessment piece, where leaders can assess situations is really critical, because oftentimes if you don't assess even at the very beginning when you're working with someone, and I'd say this goes both ways, is, you may lose right off the bat, you may lose somebody who could be a really great worker, because you've kind of chosen the wrong style that just really doesn't fit with them. So when I'm working with folks, especially at the beginning, I really try to assess where they are, what they like, how they like to work, what works for them, how much do they want to be communicated with, how little. I try to ask some of those questions up front so I can get a better understanding of what the most effective way to work with them is going to be. And that's really true for even a collaborative, like with a colleague, a coworker, just as much as it is with somebody who you supervise or who is supervising you. There's nothing wrong with having a conversation with your supervisor and saying, what really works for me is blank, or I work best when my supervisor blank. It's one of those things that is really critical to kind of know up front, and can really make a huge difference in the quality of the working relationship and how you're able to perform on the job. And as I mentioned, kind of styles evolve as others evolve. So, you may need to be more directive and then kind of, back off. But if somebody is really independent, it may not be best even at the beginning to start with being really directive. So it's one of those things, kind of intuition may play into this. You may just kind of get a sense of a person, and experiment. And if it doesn't work out, you can always kind of circle back around and have a conversation about that. And really say, hey, I was trying to go down this road with you, but it feels like it didn't really work. Can we talk about this? Let's try something else, rather than just ignoring it. A lot of people don't want to have those conversations. So we're going to talk about that a little bit moving forward this semester as well. So we are going to kind of close up our kind of classroom time and move into office hours in a few minutes. But I wanted to just kind of have a little nod to flawed leadership styles. So we've been talking about, just kind of basic leadership styles, but there definitely are a whole long list, and this list is probably not exhaustive at all. I imagine that some of you have experienced working with an oblivious manager or a narcissist or a charmer who is just all about getting together and talking and being very relational, but may not be so good at actually getting things done or providing you good direction. We've all probably either been a micromanager or worked with a micromanager. So micromanaging is definitely something to keep an eye out for, especially even in your groups that you're going to work on in your time here in the program. So I'm not going to go over each of these. They're explained pretty well in your text, but I just wanted to see if there was any questions about any of these, or if any of these kind of really resonated with you all as you were thinking about your past leadership experiences.
I was thinking just now about, so my current field placement is at a Boys and Girls Club, and my supervisor is the program director, but then the executive director is a pretty awful man that's just a really terrible boss, and he really falls under the put downer category. So my program director, my supervisor, recently got another master's in nonprofit administration, and he's just got his bachelor's degree and is feeling very insecure about it. So at every possible moment, he's talking about, or he's putting her down as much as he can,
because he feels threatened.
Because he feels insecure because she's technically ranked a little bit lower than him. So I've seen a lot of that in the past few days.
Yeah, and that's just so unfortunate. I mean, what a waste of energy. But it's, and it's just another I'm so sorry you're going through that, first of all. It's just another reminder, though. This is just, we're working in the real world. And even though we're in the social services, and people are really they just want to help. Oftentimes they really don't, or they make things worse because of essentially their own issues. And this is yet again, and just reinforces the point that it's so important for you to meaningfully reflect about who you are, what your strengths are, what you're capable of, what are your limitations. You're going to cover all of this in your leadership self-assessment. And, it's important to think about these things, and identify, like, have I been the loner? Have I been the oblivious manager? Have I been the put downer or the misleader or there's aspects of this, or maybe some kind of combination of some of these. And it's important to just, objectively and without judgment, to identify these things that you have been through so that you can not do them in the future, especially the ones that are truly negative, like being a narcissist or a put downer or something like that. Sometimes we're a misleader and we don't realize it. And, so self-awareness is going to help you avoid pitfalls in the future. It's going to help you learn more faster, because you're not going to be oblivious and wonder why you're all consistently having problems with this one employee. You're going to figure out, like, okay, well, maybe because I'm doing this, it's having this reaction, or you're going to know to ask questions or to talk about it. So these are really, at the end of the day, they're just simply prompts for you to be thinking about your current situations and your past situations. So thank you for bringing up that example. So last thing I wanted to ask you all about is to see if you guys enjoyed taking the StrengthsFinder assessment. I know we may have talked about it a little bit last week, but I just wanted to check in again, because it is really important for your group work and also your individual assessments or leadership self-assessment assignment. So I just wanted to check in for a few minutes about your experience with the assessment. Does anybody is anybody struggling to really understand what the strengths mean, or the domains of the strengths, or anything like that? Everybody understands it perfectly. No questions at all.
I think I've never been really in a leadership role. So although I understand on paper as I'm reading through and flipping through, I guess I'd have to really sit back and figure out how I actually embody these specific themes, because I've not applied them necessarily that I remember or that I can recall right now. To leading anyone else, or to managing necessarily in like a professional setting. Yeah. Yeah, I totally get that, and I imagine that is there anybody that agrees with Kendria? There's probably many of you who are in the same boat, and that's a great place to be. That's totally fine. I would say, if you feel like Kendria does, to think about, especially when you're doing your assessment, to maybe think about, it's not necessary. So yes, this is talking about your strengths and potentially what your capacities are, your abilities, or might kind of be inclined to handle something a certain way. Think about how, also don't forget the piece about how did you react when you were being supervised by somebody else. So if you can, you can include examples that you might reflect in that way, like for the assignment. Also, there's, it kind of arms you with some tools moving forward to think about how you might respond to a situation. So there's actually some pretty concrete ideas for how to develop additional skills, or to, it gives you some strategies in certain areas. So it's, you don't necessarily have to be able to say, well, when I led this group, or when I, managed this person. You can really think about it, like, even in like, what was going on in your family? Did you take on a certain role in your family, like with your siblings? Were you constantly sort of the mediator or the peacekeeper, or were you constantly coming up with games for everybody to play? Like, you can think about it outside of professional settings as well, especially if you're struggling in that area. So I would say just kind of try not to overthink and overanalyze it, and just kind of know that it's perfectly fine that, like,
you may not have been able to apply everything. So number one is okay. And number two, like you can think about it in terms other than professional settings. And then three, think about it in terms of how did you handle a situation when you were the supervisee or the managee in that situation. Does that make sense? Kendria?
Yep, that makes sense. Especially I'm the oldest of three, and so I definitely know. I mean, some would say I'm domineering, but that's not the word I'm going to use.
Mm-hmm.
So I know I definitely have leadership skills if
Mm-hmm.
you talk to my siblings.
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm going to think about that, because that's probably where a lot of them in the family setting comes in handy.
Yeah.
And amongst my social circle, my friends, I'm usually the leader. You know, things like that. So
yeah, so exactly. So you can just think about some examples. But I don't want you to just throw all the professional examples, because I mean, I imagine you've had some job at some point, or maybe not.
Mm-hmm.
But just think about like just how you worked with other people. So maybe it's not necessarily a leadership role, but how did you function as a coworker? Like, did you see any of these strengths showing up? Like just when you worked together on a project with someone, or when you worked on a line, like in a line shift with somebody else, like how did that go? And then also you can think about it from the perspective of the different domains. And on page 24 in the text, it's got this little box that has these domains. And that's what I was referencing in your, when I was saying, post your strengths and kind of get to know folks. And when you turn in for your SWOT outline, and it has the strengths-based leadership profile where you can all write down your the strengths of your group, so you can kind of get this larger picture. It's based on the domains, and it's one of the things that makes this book different from the StrengthsFinder 2.0 book that you may be familiar with, is that it does start to organize these strengths into these different categories or domains. And so you can realize that when you kind of take a step back and you look at all 5 of your strengths, that typically they're going to cluster. And the book talks about that. Like typically our strengths are clustered in usually about 2 categories. I had a student today where every single one of her top 5 strengths was in relationship building. And then I had some students who their strengths were spread across, 3 domains. And occasionally I've seen 4, but that's much rarer. So that's also just another way you can kind of look at this, is like, okay, well, you may have not actually, can't think of examples of, these individual strengths, but when you look at them collectively and you realize, well, wow, I've got 3 or 4 strengths under strategic thinking. Yeah, that makes sense with how I, plan out how to do my assignments and across the semester, or how I, think about certain things, or so you can kind of think about it a little more globally as well. Does that make sense?
Okay. Yep.
Okay.
It does.
Now that applies to everybody. Yeah. Any other questions about the strengths or anything about the group assignment? I know, again, that's a little bit down the road, but just putting it out there, you'll have more communication about that. Okay, well, we can officially move into office hours, and there may be no questions for office hours, which is totally fine. I'm gonna stop sharing and just check in with you all to see if there's any questions. I'm also gonna go ahead and stop recording. Oh, good, Kimberly. I'm glad your hubby's getting some. You're liking that as well.